Hello everybody and welcome back to The Discerning Gamer. Today we're going to be looking at the first in-depth gameplay for the Orkz, which is very exciting. I know I'm late to the party on this one, but I was moving house, so kind of didn't have a computer to record with. Anyway, I still think there is some cool stuff that I've picked up in here and hopefully can offer some useful analysis on. So this opening cinematic, I loved how tongue-in-cheek it was. I think the Orkz definitely deserve to be in large part the comic relief to the 40k universe and the game, so totally cool with that. And I thought the way they had Gorguts whispering to the Eldar was hilarious. Though when he starts talking normally, I thought his voice didn't really sound as boss-like as I was hoping. It sounded a lot like the other regular boys, and with Orkz, as they get older, they get bigger, they get tougher. That's how you get to be a war boss, and I was expecting him to have this, great booming chest cavity and a really menacing rumble. But obviously that's a minor point. Gorgut's abilities look right on point. They're all really aggressive and also ramshackle. He looks like a mess, like a really violent mess, which is perfect because I feel like, how else would you sum up Orkz? Also notice at the end there how the tank busters say, "Who you gonna call?" Awesome call out to Ghostbusters, made me smile. One thing I noticed after this fight, and in generally throughout this gameplay footage, was the bodies and giblets left lying around after all the fights, and they seem to stay around for a long time, which I love. I think that adds a lot to the atmosphere, and they show up really nicely on this tile set, and hopefully goes some way to addressing people's concerns that the game isn't grim dark enough in line with the 40k universe. The person playing in this footage was kind enough to give us a rundown on all of the Ork buildings. This might not be all of them, but the ones that we see in this demo. So you've got the boys' hut, which is for your basic boys, slugger boys, shooter boys, and also knobs later on. There's the Daka hut, which is like your fire support, your tank busters, def gun looters, which are going to act like devastators, I'm guessing. And also trucks, which is kind of an odd thing to mix in there, because you think it would come from the mech boy thing, but maybe that is in line. It's to put it lower down the tech tree, perhaps. Next up is the mech shop. That's got your Def Riders, Killer Cans, and Def Treads, as well as a big track. So the Def Copters look like they're going to be kind of low damage, flanking, scouting, outrider units. Killer Cans are kind of a lighter anti-tank unit. They fire bursts of rockets and but don't stay as well toe-to-toe as something like a Def Dread. And the big track actually looks like a sort of copied or looted Basilisk artillery piece or some sort of big artillery piece. So kind of interesting that we're not seeing the looted wagon or the looted tank in the lineup here, because that's been in all of the Dawn of War games previously. But also I do like seeing more Ork walkers, because they just look ramshackle, hilarious, right on tone for the faction. I also noticed a little tidbit in the description down at the bottom here that it says that listening posts stop resource add-ons from being damaged. So I don't know if it actually stops them from being attacked altogether, or it's just referring to the fact that it defends them with a some sort of built-in cannon. That's kind of an interesting point, that perhaps it buys you a bit more time to react to resource harassment. Something to look out for in future gameplay in the beta. It also looks like all research is centralized in the pile of guns, and we also see a little section here where we notice that the War Tower escalates the tech level. So the more of those you get out, presumably the higher level of tech that you can build. But also kind of an interesting point of that you can get, as an opponent, you can guess what tech level the Ork's at, or perhaps even hamper his teching progress by destroying his war towers. So that's a really interesting bit of choreographing for people playing against the Orcs, and a chance to create more opportunities for attack and tactical play and reading your opponent, and just general good complex game development that's going to keep the game sort of fresh and interesting and creating interesting plays, hopefully after it's been released and continues to be developed. The way the war towers seem to function actually reminds me of what I was talking about in my Eldar breakdown video, that by controlling the Eldar's webway gates, destroying them or limiting the areas where they could possibly be, you're limiting their movement and helping to control them, whereas the Eldar wants to spread them around. So there's a really interesting tension, and obviously it's going to be a similar affair with the Orcs in terms of not only giving them map control, but giving them access to tech as well. So I like the way there's lots of ways for the Orc to gain additional tech by taking risks with war towers, but also there's smaller ways for his opponent to fight back against that as well. Also noticed here, just a quickie, that the Orc buildings are dropped from orbit, which in almost like a parody of how the Space Marine buildings come down. Loved that, and love to see the Gretchens running around with their ridiculously oversized spanners. So this is kind of the first part of the gameplay where we see the scrap system being really detailed. And first of all, we see Slugger Boys picking up scrap, and it gives them armor, so more health to help them close distance with the enemy. And there are other videos out there, which I'll link below, that chronicle how scrap affects nearly every unit in the Orc army, giving them some sort of permanent upgrade. And also for heroes, the way it can be used to give them charges to their hero abilities or improve them. Also, you can use scrap to build buildings on the field, to produce additional vehicles. It looks like scrap is going to make a huge difference to your success as an Orc player, which is fantastic. I think it's right on point with lore and a really interesting gameplay mechanic. Not only for the Orc, but also for the people playing against them, because from a lore perspective, you want to almost strike the Orcs tactically to, divide their forces, cut off the many heads of the Hydra, try and kill the war boss, and you don't want to fight a churning, all-out confrontation with Orcs, a pitched battle almost, because that's what they thrive off of. And this system demonstrates that perfectly, because if you have a big fight and take loads of losses, the Orc can probably replenish them quite quickly, but then he's got a load of scrap to pick up and upgrade those units, make them even better, whereas you've just got your basic units. So for Space Marines, it's going to be about limiting those confrontations, perhaps taking out the war towers to limit the amount of scrap they can call in passively. And for the Eldar, it's going to be about hit and run tactics, making sure you don't leave anything behind for them to pick up. So that's just another layer on top of all the other mechanics and gameplay that we're seeing, that is going to be factoring into our decision making and the flow of the battle, particularly in multiplayer, is really what I'm talking about here. But I think this is a really well designed system, and subtle game design system, so I'm really looking forward to how this will pan out in the multiplayer. Here we see kind of another pitched battle. For me, this looked really cool. I love the corpses piling up, grenades flying back and forth, the air full of rounds, tracer fire, and even in this confined area, it gives me more of a sense about how this game's going to work in the multiplayer. How you're going to be expressing skill in terms of throwing nades, dodging nades, kiting melee units, and getting good arcs of fire with your ranged units whilst enemies are in constricted spaces. So this has all got me feeling very hopeful for the multiplayer, and also just enjoying the aesthetic. In this section we see Zapna Noggin come in. He's the Orc Weird Boy and the second elite that we see in this gameplay. His teleportation sequence to summon in just looks so orky and cool. Really loved it, and the little musical flourish afterwards just tops it off, makes it feel like quite an important event, which obviously it is from a gameplay perspective. So here we see the mech shop being built in the middle of the map, and the build animation for it is awesome, really orky, I love that. But also we see next to it some big piles of scrap being used to build not only vehicles but a wire tower. That's really interesting because obviously I'm imagining scrap gives a huge discount to the construction cost of the wire tower, and they're vital to the Orkz teching up. But it obviously, the scrap is not going to, big piles of scrap from vehicles and stuff are not going to be in your base, so it's encouraging you to put those wire towers out on the map and actually make them vulnerable to enemy attack, but also you get an economic incentive for that. So again, I think this is a really great system. Obviously in the community's discourse about the game, there's been a lot of disagreement as to whether the elites are a good thing, if they're making the game too much like a MOBA. I thought this section of the gameplay obviously will and can change during development, the balance of it, but notice how Orkz goes in alone and gets totally mauled. He is using abilities to deflect damage, but he gets disrupted by a grenade and just torn to pieces. So I think that as a balance point for the game looks really good. I like the idea that the elites are strong, but they're more of a force multiplier than a one-man army. And finally, right towards the end of the gameplay video, we see the Ork super weapon mechanic, which is the tractor beam. So it's a beacon that calls down a big rock from orbit, but also a preliminary kind of meteorite bombardment, and you can either leave that in one place, or a friendly or even an enemy unit can grab it and run off with it. Now that's interesting because you could imagine like an Eldar jet bike taking it and whipping it off to the other side of the map where it's suddenly totally useless to the Orks. Likewise, you could imagine Orkz picking it up and tanking a load of fire to get it into the middle of the enemy army to make sure that the super weapon lands on target. I think that's a great bit of design. I think that'll make for some really interesting gameplay moments, and I also think that it will enable us to use super weapons more frequently, because it's not this kind of big punch to the face that just happens to the player. They can interact and do stuff to mitigate the damage or react against it. However, one thing that you do notice at the end there is that when the rock comes down, it doesn't actually damage the Orks at all. And I'm not sure how that works from a balance perspective, particularly in multiplayer. I mean, first of all, it robs it of some of its kind of apocalyptic impact, but also, doesn't it mean that you could just put it in the middle of your army and run your army like some sort of giant death bomb into the middle of the enemy's army, and have a guaranteed huge damage hit in there? I mean, yeah, to me that looks like it might need some looking at. So that's all I wanted to bring up from looking at this latest Ork gameplay. There are more detailed stuff that I can link below. Obviously I know I'm a bit late to the party, so I'm not going to tread on other people's toes, but hopefully you found some of what I had to say interesting. If you did, please feel free to leave a like and subscribe. If not, then feel free to hit dislike, and constructive criticism is always welcomed in the comments below.